Hi there, and welcome to the show that's all about celebrating all the shapes, sizes, and colors of diversity as well as adversity, and seeks to inspire the world through authentic conversations that are both meaningful and relatable. Each episode, I deep dive into the extraordinary journey of an average yet super incredible person in the diversity space. We talk about everything from their personal accomplishments and or contributions to social impact to some of the adversity they've had to face along the way and the resiliency and tenacity that got them to where they are today. I'm your host, Tisha Gillespie, and this is Not Your Average Goat. This week, I sit down with Kisha Brown, founder and CEO of Justis Connection, a Black lawyer referral and legal resources platform. We talk about everything from her career journey going from practicing attorney to becoming the first woman to hold the position of Director of Civil Rights for the Baltimore City Office of Civil Rights, and now today to a legal tech entrepreneur. We also deep dive into a handful of different civil rights issues, including police reform, poverty, and a lot about racial inequity, including a lot of experiences that Kisha had starting as a child when her family moved to Georgia from Queens, New York in the late 80s. And then we talk about some really cool things that her and her team at Justis Connection are doing today in the technology space, including developing a program that will make things like facial recognition more inclusive and equitable for people of color. I can't wait for you to hear what we talk about during this conversation, so let's get started. Thank you, Kisha, for sitting down today and joining the show. I'm very excited to have you here.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to talk today.
Well, I think it's very interesting. So we actually met on LinkedIn. Usually you have people you connect with on LinkedIn who you've worked with, but then, you get those really great connection requests sometimes for someone who reaches out. And I think you were definitely one of those people. And I remember you reached out to me, I want to say about a year and a half ago, and we've been in contact ever since, off and on. But you reached out right before you launched your legal startup business, Justis Connection.
Yeah, it's crazy how time flies. When you said a year or so ago, I'm like, wow. Days add into weeks and weeks add into months and so forth. But yeah, now I'm here as a legal tech startup founder of Justis Connection. The full vision of Justis Connection is an online marketplace dedicated to the Black experience in the law. I'm a lawyer myself, and so am focused on educating and empowering people in the law, but recognizing that our increased access to justice is paramount in order for you to really be able to fully take part in democracy. And so we've started by building out the first Black lawyer referral and legal resource platform. So it's a place where people can go and connect with a trusted lawyer who's culturally competent and connected to be able to advise and lead and be able to service their legal needs.
Such a remarkable business. And I can't wait to dive in with it more with you about kind of your journey getting there and how the startup process has gone and just your professional career in general. But Kisha, one thing I love to do with everyone, because I think it's so interesting to kind of take a step back, is to go back in time a bit and find out who you were around 8, 9, 10 years old. What were your passions? How was your personality different from today?
Yeah, no, that's such a great question because, sometimes you kind of think like, what was I up to back then, right? Like, it's always great when you connect with elders or people that you knew from your childhood and they make a comment, right? Reflecting sort of on who you were or what you were like. And for me, as a 9, 10-year-old, we had just left East Elmhurst, New York, and moved to St. Simon's Island, Georgia, which is literally, Tisha, the exact opposite ends of the world, right? Like fully metropolitan, culturally diverse, just city life, family, not too far, to New York. And then we moved to St. Simon's Island, Georgia, where you took a causeway over to get to the island. It was really originally where the slaves would run away to, because it was just marshland. And then over time, when air conditioning was invented, and it became a golf resort. So you had really, really wealthy white people who lived on the island, as well as really, really poor Black people and other folks who lived on the island as well. So it was such a time period of adjustment for me, sort of figuring out this new landscape. We talked different than everyone. Our background was different. And as a kid, I think I did a fairly good job of making new friends, but it was also very clear to me that there was a line, and you either picked white friends or you picked Black friends. And there wasn't much mixing, and there wasn't the same level of sort of environment, Black environment, and diversity that I was used to.
And this is the 80s that we're talking about, so not even that long ago, if you think about it. Are there any specific experiences from interacting with kids at school or in your neighborhood that kind of stick out to you as being key moments and kind of defining these differences between, what you were experiencing in New York versus now in Georgia?
There are many of those experiences. One that always seems to like drop people's jaw to the floor is when I was attending my public high school. I was named the Black Sweetheart Princess for 9th grade. So each grade had a sweetheart princess, and you had a Black winner and a white winner. And so you got to vote twice, one for the Black girl and one for the white girl. So that was something that was, and that's in the 90s, that's 1992, right? I'm just told all my age. Everybody's not giving me age. They're like, how old is she?
Do the math, guys.
Right.
No,
oh,
don't.
And then I would say the other is when I went to my white high school. And my sister and I were the only Black kids in the K through 12 program. And that was a really stressful experience, right? A lot of the kids had the Confederate flag as their license plate. These are the white privileged kids who live on the island and have not been exposed to Black people for the most part. Many of them went to that private school their whole educational time period. And so it just was super stressful, right? Just having to be on eggshells sometimes, and also feeling like you're representing everybody that's not heterosexual, privileged, white high schooler. So when I got the opportunity, I would, after class, after school, I would go and do the opposite. I would go and I would hang with my Black friends, and many of them who lived in the projects. And so I lived two very different, I don't want to say two different lives, but I had two very different experiences during my high school years.
You have been in the legal space for your entire career. What was the motivation for you to major in poli-science and get into that field?
Yeah, I mean, it was probably from the original seed that was planted by my family, right? Like, and I think it's so important that we plant seeds in our young people. And, sometimes folks look at folks and, oh, you don't know what you want to do with your life. Yeah, we don't, right? We come on this earth and we're all trying to figure it out. And I think it's so important when you see a young person and you see something in them, you say it. Right? You call it, you acknowledge it, you bless it. And so as one of the earliest memories that I've been told, because I myself don't remember it firsthand, but my grandmother said that my great-grandmother, who was born in the country in Jamaica and had like a 3rd grade education, it's my great-grandmother I'm talking about, from her experiences with me, she called me she said, I'm going to be the next Margaret Thatcher. Right. And so for those who are like, who's Margaret? Because it sounds old. Right. So especially for a Jamaican woman, Margaret Thatcher, right, at that time, was the Prime Minister of Great Britain, right? And she was the first female. And she was also known as like the Iron Lady, right? So take it as you will. But as a woman, to rise to that rank for that type of country was a big deal, right? And, Tisha, when women are in leadership, right, when they are ambitious, when they have vision, there are going to be those who challenge how we show up, right? And they're going to challenge whether we're ladylike, feminine enough, too outspoken, too aggressive, too bossy, too this and too that. And so it's interesting, early on when I was told that, I almost had mixed feelings, right? Because there are negative connotations that come with being a woman who leads, who finds herself in leadership, who wants to serve others and others follow. And that's why I think, when you have someone that's able to say, I see this in you, right? And I also had family members say, you make a great lawyer. And that's because I talk a lot, case in point, right? And because I would argue, right? I'm as you already heard, like have Jamaican ancestry, and that's what we do for fun, right? Like Jamaicans are a very boisterous people. And so there are all these things that sometimes can be cast as negatives, but it's important that we write our own stories, right? So you can receive the insight or the feedback from others, but not let it completely dictate who you are or where you're going.
100% agree. And I also agree with also calling people up when you see something in them and calling them up to say, hey, I see this in you, own that about yourself. Because I think that there's also the perspective that you never know what kind of encouragement or support people are getting in their family or personal lives. And they may not have someone close to them who's willing to say that. And I think it's very special that your great grandmother saw that in you and did call it out in you. But every opportunity you have, whether it's a coworker, a friend, a child of a friend, whoever, I think it's very important for us as a society to really look out for everyone. And I think it's interesting what you mentioned about women in leadership and it being very tough for us. I think that something I've run into throughout my career too is not always getting the pushback necessarily just from men, but also from other women who are in leadership positions. And that could probably be hours of conversation in itself, but I think that that's also something that we as a society need to work on too. Women supporting women, no matter what color, religious background, whatever. I think we all need that.
Yeah, no, I think you raise a great point. I think the lack of supporting women, women's ambition or women's vision is universal, right?
Mm-hmm.
I think it hurts more, or it's more noticeable, or it stings when it's also another woman, right? Because you're like, come on now, sis, I know you know where I'm coming from, right? Or you should be able to relate in some regards. And when other women don't show up for one another, I think it can be taken as an offense, right? But I also think many women don't know how to show up for others because they haven't been shown up for, right? So they don't even know how to emulate the type of activity, the experience that they themselves want.
Now, Kisha, you go to law school at Georgetown University. Afterwards, you are a practicing attorney for a while. You work for the Maryland Legal Aid. Your career does not stay in that type of role for a long time. What was your headspace back in 2005, if you can remember? Did you want to actively practice for the length of your career? Did you know that your career was going to take the trajectory that it did take?
Yeah, no, I did not. Right? Like, I think, you think or you hope and the reality is, right, you have no idea. You really don't. And I didn't. So I wanted to do meaningful work. I did not want to be at a large law firm, but I didn't know what else that could look like, right? And so when I started with the Legal Aid Bureau, I luckily had an opportunity to sort of, or at least took the opportunity or made it for myself, to shape and mold what my position would look like. And probably a little bit more than they expected, but they gave me an inch and I just took a mile and did my thing.
Are there any key moments during the time that you were practicing that stand out to you?
Um, Lots, right? So I was representing non-custodial parents who owed large child support arrears,
Mm,
right? And so oftentimes people, especially back then, they would call them deadbeat dads,
yeah.
right? Men who didn't pay their child support. And sort of countering that notion, like would call them dead broke dads, right? They're dead broke, not deadbeat. 70% of all child support is owed by was owed by individuals who made less than 20,000, right? So if mama's poor and daddy's poor, guess what? Baby's gonna be poor too.
Yeah.
And we spend a lot of time focused on the one parent who's not in the household to supplement a lifestyle that that is out of reach for the child, not because of either parent, but because really the constructs of our society and poverty, right? And so there's so many different elements that, for me, learning about how child support was like a cog in the wheel of poverty was so enlightening. And I went to almost every prison in the state and gave presentations on their rights and responsibilities as fathers. Folks would go into prison and have child support and come out and owe tens of thousands of dollars because their support was still going when they were incarcerated, and clearly there was no way for them to pay. So I drafted drafted a bill that became law, that couple of different child support bills actually, that helped sort of address some of the inequities and make a pathway for parents who owed to get back on track and get the money to the children.
That's so cool. It's very cool that you're able to have an impact in such a big way. 2013, you become the Director of Civil Rights for the Maryland Office of the Attorney General. That's pretty remarkable position to hold. What do you remember about some of the civil rights cases you helped influence or work on during that time?
Yeah, so it was an interesting time. I was also simultaneously the director of legislative affairs, right? So I was
Mm.
over the legislative agenda for the office. And at one point, NAACP president on the Eastern Shore of Maryland, which, to give context for folks, that's where Harriet Tubman was born, right? That's where she came from and made all her treks to. So it's still the South, right? And it is old plantation world. All of Maryland is. That's why we're the old
Yeah.
line state. But anyways, so one of the NAACP presidents comes to the Attorney General and shares how he believes that there was election tampering, or voter intimidation, I should say, excuse me, and that this was a problem in this past election, and brought all different types of ways that the white candidate was trying to mislead Black voters away from a Black candidate, and put themselves in that place. And so through like doing research and calls and investigations, it soon became clear that any attempt to resolve the issue on a local level was somewhat tainted, right? Because everybody in those types of small towns knows everybody and is related, and they all work together, even in the neighboring towns. And so I worked with that president to change the law, like to create a law that would allow for individuals who had claims of voter intimidation and voter fraud and things of that nature to be able to go to the state prosecutor and to be able to avail themselves there of getting access to justice in a fair investigation, as opposed to it remaining on the local level. And so it was one of those things where like there was no fanfare, right? Like nobody called and was like, oh, oh, we made progress on voting and civil rights, but it's on the books, right? And the next time, because there will be a next time, that there is those types of claims for voter intimidation, voter fraud, and so forth, there's now a more neutral resource that has greater resources for people to be able to go to.
Yeah. Wow, it's so awful that things like that were happening, and like you said, it will probably happen again. Do you know, so I know that most of your work has been done in Maryland. Do you know if anything that you were able to accomplish did have any impact or reach in the greater DMV area?
That's a good question. I hope.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, some things when you're talking about, especially like police reform, there were times that I went and I spoke at different conferences about sort of the impact of having civilian review boards. What are some of the necessary policy changes needed at that local civilian review board level, and how we can increase better relations between police and the civilians they serve. So in that sense, I think some of those things had greater impact. And even when I was doing child support stuff as well, I would go and sort of preach the good gospel about it to different jurisdictions, because most states don't have anybody that's helping poor people with their child support, right? Like nobody's calling up their congressman like, poor people need more help in figuring out how they can like not go into debt over child support, right? Like that's not on anybody's radar hardly. And the people that is on their radar tend to feel like they don't have any political clout or a voice. So, and having those conversations on a state level, as well as with policy folks in DC and in the region and around the country, hopefully helped influence how policy evolved.
You know, it's so interesting to me. I feel like there are certain issues in the civil rights space, in the economic space, that would benefit from having more federal input if we, could probably, I mean, I don't want to make this like a political conversation, but if we could lean a little bit more democratic on things, I think would be beneficial. But then there are, certain issues that probably do make more sense for the states to control solely. But I think that's, what you were talking about. It's in some of these states just don't have the representation or don't have civilians pushing their delegates or their senators to improve things. So it's sad that, we're not connected on those things across different regions all the time.
No, it's true. Sometimes it's like this whole concept of like every state getting to do something different, right? It kind of lends itself to inequities and sort of inconsistencies in how we as a country even value certain things. And we value children, or we value the poor, or we value helping one another, but nevertheless, it's so different, right? Depending on where you're born, how you can be taken care of, right? And what's available to you.
You do something pretty amazing in 2015. At least I think it's pretty amazing. When you become the first woman to hold the Director of Civil Rights and Wage Enforcement for the Baltimore City Office of Civil Rights. What was your headspace when you were offered that position back then?
It's funny. So I had two big thoughts, right?
Yeah.
One, because running a civil rights office is like a civil rights lawyer's dream, right? That's my passion. And also relief, because I was transitioning out of the Attorney General's office and was like, what is my next? Like, where do I go next? So I was also like, honestly, like really relieved to be able to connect to an office that was so meaningful. And then the meaningfulness of it was like, oh, this is what's up. Let's do this thing, right? We're about to like come up in here and put our all into this. Like I felt really passionate about it being such a tremendous opportunity to serve the people of Baltimore.
Did you know at the time that you were either applying or offered the position that you would be the first female to hold this role?
I didn't, right? Like it wasn't until much later that I realized that there had only been like a handful of directors and they were all men. The one before me, I think, was the first Black male. But that none of them were lawyers. I'm like, how you got an office that enforces civil rights law? You don't have no lawyers here. So it was a big sort of turn of events, right, in order to really bring in this a new type of leader.
What do you remember most about your time in that position?
You do not know the real sort of impact of bad police on communities, right? And I was very clear when I was there that the Baltimore City Police Department was terrorizing different parts of Baltimore City. And it sounds very strong, and that's exactly how I mean it, right? Because some of the things that I heard firsthand and learned, it was disheartening in many aspects. It's very weighty and something that I think the public wouldn't even know how to wrap their heads around. I think, people are still talking about the murder of George Floyd and how that has really been such a catalyst in some regard for corporate and other types of civic engagement. It's still questionable to see how much of it will actually follow through and really be impactful. But people reference it as this turning point, right? Because they themselves saw something and experienced through watching this horrific act. And there are communities that have George Floyd experiences all the time. And the trauma that so many people lived through was something that I wasn't prepared for when I started that job.
There are a lot of people who don't start fighting for or empathizing with issues like this when it comes to discrimination, racism, etc., until they know someone who's gone through it. And I think it's really hard and very unfortunate that it has to come to that in terms of, like you were saying, these types of situations. I mean, we had a big case in Baltimore, very similar to George Floyd. And it's very disheartening, as you say, that people, I don't know if they're just, I don't care about this, or if it's, it's not in my backyard, or maybe they don't actually believe it's happening, which, I mean, the media, that's a long story too about, how the media turns other things into things that they're not actually. But in this case, it's very tough to get the nation, I think, aligned on something like this. And we definitely are not 100% aligned at all, but I think that's definitely the significance of George Floyd, is of how far reaching it was. And I guess that's also partially thanks to social media too nowadays.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's a really hard thing to talk about. And I've known people who have, been in one camp of thought and then changed over to another camp of thought when they knew someone who was going through something. And it's very hard to just sometimes to have those conversations with people. So.
Yeah, no, it can be. And I definitely respect those professional and personal settings that are doing the work, right? And having those conversations, albeit as uncomfortable as they may be at times, but very necessary.
Hey there, GOAT fans. We're not finished yet. I just wanted to take a quick break just to say thank you for your support and for listening to the show. If you're enjoying the conversation, please hit that subscribe button so you can get notified of new episodes. Also, consider following us on social. You can find us on Twitter and Instagram at NotAverageGoat. We can also be found on Facebook and YouTube. Now, let's get back to the conversation. So, Kisha, we talked about this, I think, a little bit, but the legal space historically has been very dominated by men. What, if any, experiences have you had trying to fight through? I mean, you are a very powerful, very strong woman, but were there any times during your career as a female, as a Black female, that you had to fight through because of who you are?
There's the microaggressions, right? In a meeting when somebody's talking over you and nobody hears you, or you're overlooked for that, you're not getting the raise even though you hear others are getting certain percentages. There's the macro, right? Where somebody is rude to your face, right? And it's in a way that you know isn't just because it's Tuesday and they got a bad attitude, right? And it's more personal. There's the being, called the wrong name 5, 10, 20 times in a meeting by folks that you've met several times, right? And they're calling you the other Black person's name, right? Because it's either Kisha or Monica, so it's got to be one of them. There's so many different, experiences as a Black woman in this country that happen because of your race, because of your sex. And for me, it's, sometimes I cuss somebody out in my head. Sometimes I call somebody to cuss them out while I'm talking to that person, right? Like, let me call Tisha, tell them what I really meant to say, right? Sometimes you call people out on what they've said or what they've done. And I think you navigate and at the end of the day, it's really about honoring your own energy and personal space. My goal, my job here is not to be a teacher to everybody because I need to teach them how to show up. No, the only person I can control is myself, right? And how I show up and how I respond. And, that started from my days back in St. Simon's Island, being one of the only. So now, fast forward decades later, it's not a surprise, right? Can it be hurtful? Yes. Can it be frustrating? Yes. Can it be annoying? Yes. Can it make you pissed off? Yes. Surprised? Usually not, right? As a person of color, as a Black woman, you better know it's coming. You may not have experienced it ever. You might say, oh, sorry to hear that, Kisha. I never had racism in my life. Hold on, sis. It's coming. This is America, right? You're not gonna, I don't believe that you can go through this country, live a full life and not experience it. Do I hope that changes? Yes. Do I expect it to change? I think so, right? I think it all depends on, I can't say what's going to happen or what's not going to happen. So many people I know never thought a Black person would be elected president. That was the ringing thing when Barack Obama, right, became president. Oh, I never thought this could happen in my lifetime. So we don't know what the future holds, but we must prepare for the present. And that's the best we can do, I figure.
It's interesting when you say, hey, someone's told me I've never experienced racism in the workplace or wherever. And I do definitely think that there will be a time where they notice it and they do have that experience. I also think that there are some people who just automatically disregard those red flags because they're so conditioned to this is life. This is how people treat other people. And they don't always see those microaggressions as being discrimination, as being racism, when they actually are.
Yeah, no, I think you're right. Whether you acknowledge it or not, it is what it is. But I think that there is, even when you don't necessarily acknowledge, either you're unconsciously not acknowledging it or you're consciously. If you're consciously not acknowledging it, guess what? You kind of just did, right? if you don't realize that that's where the root is, that's okay. I don't think that you can go through, and maybe it'll be different for the next generation, right? But in my lifetime, I don't know anybody who's a person of color who has not had an experience.
You pivot, you go off on your own and you decide, I'm going to be a legal tech entrepreneur and I am going to start a business, Justis Connection. Can you talk to me kind of about the motivation and the drivers about how you actually conceived Justis Connection?
Once you become a lawyer, and the lawyers out there can probably relate, once you start law school, right, people start asking you for legal referrals, right? As a Black person, only 4.8% of all lawyers are Black. So when a Black person knows you're a lawyer, they're like, hey, right, do you know anybody that does dot, 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 right? Because chances are, there's only 4.8% of us. Most Black people do not know lawyers. And so I recognized over and over, that was something consistent. People were always asking me for legal referrals. And I recognized that, one, as Black lawyers, that meant that we didn't have a concerted network to support our own community, leaving the most vulnerable in a system that historically and continuously oppresses and marginalizes Black people, that Black lawyers were leaving money on the table, therefore. And if we had our own network, our modern day legal green book, how that would be a win-win. A win for Black lawyers to grow their practices. When you grow your practice, you're going to hire more people. When you hire more people, chances are you can do the same thing that white people do. You're going to hire people that look like you, meaning that more Black lawyers have access to be a part of private practice in a firm. And then our community would also be able to have greater access to more lawyers, greater visibility. Therefore, you're more likely to proactively engage the legal system, the more you know and the more resources you have. And of course, it benefits the greater society, right? Like, we want people to be able to avail themselves of their rights. We want businesses and corporations, as they are making new commitments to diversity and inclusion, for them to even consider professional services, right? Like, all of these different aspects, and how Black lawyers and how not having access to legal information is a detriment on the individual, community, and national level.
What surprised you while you were starting the business, and even over the last 1 or 2 years? Was there anything about the process that really surprised you? Like, oh, I didn't know that came with starting a business.
Everything. Everything is, I mean, I've never run my own business before, right? So it's all new. It's hard to not just share your vision, but share your vision in a way that other people sort of come on board. How do you do sales? How do you engage the market? How do you advertise? How do you, where do you spend your time doing on the marketing, the sales, on the infrastructure, and the CRM, everything, right? It's all learning, and there are resources out there. It's sort of deciphering and staying really focused and grinding, girl, grinding.
Yeah, and speaking of grinding, you've been doing that now for like a year plus. What have you done with Justis Connection since launching it? What have been some of those successes that you've had?
Yeah, so great question. And it's actually been like over 3 years, which is kind of crazy. Time flies. Some of the successes that we've had, we've booked lawyers for we've created a new pathway for lawyers to get consistent clients, which didn't exist. And on top of that, we've been able to bring legal resources to communities. like churches and sororities and fraternities and civic associations, and bringing the lawyers to them to be able to educate and inform their membership, right? To be able to be in spaces, because that's where the rubber meets the road. Like there's an aspect of this that is online and it's all about the search engine optimization. And then there's another aspect that I'm very passionate about, which is our grassroots relationships and being able to connect with real people in real time and put a face to a name, and let folks know that they have access to legal resources. That has been one of the best outcomes, right? And I'm so excited as we prepare we're in the process of finalizing our Legal 101 presentations to bring more Black lawyers sort of sharing with local chambers around Business 101 and family groups, doula groups, all these different aspects, right, of our community, Tisha, who could benefit from having, whether you're a business owner or whether you got two sticks that you rub together every day in your apartment, making it work. Like everybody needs access to legal advice. You're better for it. Even if you're like, I don't know, Kisha, or can I afford it? Some lawyers you're not even paying up front, right? They're paid on the back end when you win. So we want to demystify the notion that the law or a lawyer is only for the rich, and it's only for those who have the sophistication of whatever that means, right, to navigate the law. Everybody should have access to quality legal advice.
So I've been calling Justis Connection a startup, which it technically is, but you have actually set some pretty lofty goals for yourself to go global one day. What's really motivating you to want to take Justis Connection global? And do you have any other long-term goals?
First and foremost, I believe that I recognize that Black people, Black lawyers are everywhere, right? The diaspora, you can't go to a country and not see a Black person, a brown person, although there are some places, I suppose, that are like, who? Never before. But for the most part, right, we're all over. And I believe folks should be able to, if you're in Ghana, you should be able to find a Black lawyer. If you're in Panama, you should be able to connect with a Black lawyer. And so we definitely see the whole world as our frontier. And we've already gotten inquiries from London as well as Guyana, around the countries, around the world. So that's been kind of cool. But for me, it's about connecting folks again to legal resources and educating and empowering them. And Justis Connection as the lawyer referral is one aspect, but being able to develop technology from the Black perspective, I think we're so excited. We're actually working with two developers now to build out the first application to live in the marketplace. But technology right now is built in large part, right, from the white perspective. And even, turning on my computer, I know my experience is different because I'm a Black person. This computer reads my face in order to unlock and let me in. Now, if the lighting is bad, the computer will be like, I don't know who you are. What's going on? You look like a whole different person, right? And we often think, oh man, it's because I'm brown skin or I got to have the right lighting all the time. But it's also because the technology was developed not with you in mind. And it's not to say that on purpose they were like, make this hard for Black people, but they weren't also thinking about the inclusive nature and the diversity of our world when they built it. And the default in this country, and the default oftentimes is whiteness. So I'm excited for Justis Connection to take legal tech and build new applications from the Black perspective. That's one of my biggest motivators, because that's how we reach a broader network. That's how we make bigger impact. And you, as you've asked these amazing questions, know that I'm all about impact. I'm all about, like, I definitely want to make impact on one-to-one, but I also want to make impact on the greater society as well.
I love that so much, Kisha. And my friends and I will joke about it sometimes and laugh about it, but my friend group, like all different shades of colors of people. And if we're in a dark room taking a picture, I will sometimes look at the picture and be like, this camera's kind of racist because it just like cuts me out of the picture. But it is a real thing. It's something
Yeah,
that's, very, very serious. And it's not top of mind for a lot of people. And like you said, it's not intentional, but it is something that now that people are being told about it and becoming aware of it, what are you going to do to change it?
yeah. That's a great point, right? Like we all had those moments, right? Where we're like, dang, how come I didn't really show up, you know? Um, and
Yeah.
when I read an excellent book called Race After Technology by Dr. Ruha Benjamin, great read. And I was like, oh my gosh, it all makes sense. You know, it's one of those things where the horse isn't down out of the barn too far. We can still catch this thing. We can still develop things that are more inclusive. And it doesn't have to be like that inclusivity tax or, now you got to remember. No, that's just on GP. That's just how we rolling, right? Like it's my world, and my world, we can create things that include us on purpose. And that to me is very powerful.
You also recently put out a masterclass. Can you tell me a little bit more about that?
Yeah. So we did a masterclass on the art of the legal pitch,
Hmm.
right? Looking at how do we support the lawyers in the network with the skills and the tools they need in order to do their thing, right? You can be the badass lawyer. My job is to bring you the clients, but you got to be able to secure them. You got to be able to convey who you are and what you do in a way that is easily received. And so a part of that, we did through the art of the legal pitch. I'm actually doing a upcoming workshop on how to build a profitable network. And so these are just things that we're developing for the lawyers in our network in order to be supportive and bring new value.
On February 25th of this year, there was a momentous kind of time, a moment when President Biden announced Ketanji Brown Jackson to the Supreme Court as an associate justice. What was your initial reaction to that news, Kisha, especially because you've been in the legal field for so long?
Yeah, I was completely elated. Like I just felt so full and happy on the inside. It just felt so good. It really did. And just seeing her and learning more about her, it was it's just a beautiful, beautiful time, and continues to be as we think about what her new spot will be, like what her being on the Supreme Court, and there being more women on the Supreme Court than ever before. That's also pretty amazing, and it's exciting times to be in.
And I think just the significance too around what this does to people looking on, whether they're Black children, other women in the legal space, to just have this event happen in our lifetime, to see this type of progress that we've taken, and to know that there is hope for me to also do that. Not literal me, but people who want to be lawyers and grow up and kind of be in this political space.
Yeah, no, you're spot on. I think that's, one of the most beautiful aspects of it.
So, Kisha, one of the questions I love to ask everyone, because everyone I'm bringing on this show, I think, has been an inspiration to me in one way or another, and probably to so many other people. And so I would love to know who or what in your life has been your biggest inspiration and why.
Yeah, one of my biggest inspirations, well, my daughter is my biggest
Aw.
inspiration. I don't know if that's cliche, but she has, from the minute, she was conceived, I've been very conscious of, even more conscious of how I'm showing up in this world, right? And wanting to be a good example and a good person, right? If I am a better person, that inspires others to be good people. Hopefully that's the way it goes. And it inspires her to be a good person. And I want her to be a good human and contribute to this world. And just the experience of motherhood and being then connected to this other universe of parents is pretty incredible. And I tell you, Tisha, if I had a magic wand, the government needs to give like $10,000 a month to every parent, okay? Because I'm keeping another human alive that is going to one day grow up and pay taxes. You're welcome, right? Like, can I get some support here? But it is pretty humbling to be in charge of another human's life and to be that guide. And so, I grind because I want her to have a good life, right? I want her to be a part of a world that is more just. And so she inspires me even when times are rough or I'm tired, which I am amazed by how little sleep I need to now function. I was always an 8-hour person, like down to the minute. And I think over the last couple of nights, I've gotten a combined 8 hours. And so she keeps me motivated.
That's so beautiful. I love that, Kisha. And when she's old enough to listen to this podcast, I'm sure she's going to love that too.
Yay.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much, Kisha, for sitting down with me. I have had so much fun talking to you and getting your perspective on so many things. And I think that the listeners will really enjoy this conversation as well.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me and for this opportunity, and for you stepping out into your genius and creating this platform.
Yeah, thank you. I've been very excited to get started, very nervous as well, but I'm so grateful to people like you and the other people who are willing to be guests on this show, because you really make this show what it is. So
thank you so much, Tisha.
Not Your Average Goat is produced and edited by me, Tisha Gillespie, with music by Anton Glazov, Sergey Quadrado, and Coma Media. All content is copyrighted and should not be recreated, reproduced, or reused without explicit consent. Please visit notyouraveragegoat.org/contact for questions.